and call the meeting to order. Do we want to take the roll, Peggy, please?
Sure. Chair Cheedy?
Here.
Alderman Holfer?
Here.
Alderman Nelson?
Here.
Alderman Hammond? Here. Member Holland?
Here.
We have four.
All right, thank you. Let's go ahead and stand and do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance.
And to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item 2 is the citizens' comment period. So since I don't see anybody knocking down the doors and in the midst of our presence, we'll go ahead and close the citizens' comment period. We'll talk about the meeting minutes from February 7th, 2022. Copy of those are attached to your your packets, I think, tonight. If you had a chance to look at those, make a motion accordingly tonight. If you had a chance to look at those, make a motion accordingly.
I move we approve the minutes as published. Second.
We have a motion and a second on the minutes for February 7, 2022. Any further discussion on that motion? Hearing, seeing none. All those in favor? Moving on the agenda, I think we have our next item is a presentation regarding some OPEB benefits and so forth. So
It is, thank you. So I have Jack Shimileski from Milliman, a principal from Milliman, here to speak about our OPEB requirements. So we talk a lot about our OPEB trust and where we're at as far as the funding goes. And this is the flip side of that. This is going to be the obligation side of that. We are required to do this. Old GASB 4345 have now been replaced with 7475 requirements. And I'll turn it over and let you get started.
All right, fantastic. Thank you very much.
And I'll turn it over and let you get started.
All right, fantastic. Thank you very much. Do we need to turn this on?
But you're all on.
All right, great. So I want to start off by saying the City of Franklin, we do a lot of GASB 75 reports for a lot of municipalities within Wisconsin. City of Franklin is one of a few, I would say probably Wisconsin. City of Franklin is one of a few, I would say probably 10% or less, that have started to fund their OPEB benefits in a trust. Many of the plans or cities, municipalities, do it on a pay-as-you-go basis. So as needed, they're paid out. This is much better plan. Kudos for you guys for setting this up and seeing this through to this point. The good news is, the 10% that are funded, a few of them started funding and are very, I'd say, just started to fund just because and haven't really tried to fund the obligation. Very few, if any, future. So what's happening is for those that are underfunded or unfunded, they're pushing that obligation onto future generations, whereas what you guys have done is fund up so that you're currently funded in a great spot and can fund in the future as obligations arise. So very fund in the future as obligations arise. So very nicely done. On page 12, I'll start with looking at kind of what are we doing, what are we valuing, how do we do this, and then go through here's where we were at the beginning of the year, through here's where we are at 12/31/2021. So what we do on a liability side is we take a snapshot of your data as of a valuation date, and the valuation date for this report was January 1st, 2022, and we project out the current actives all the way into the future through receive their benefits, as well as current retirees that are on the plan, and project their benefits out again until their benefits no longer cease to exist. And so with current actives, we use the state of Wisconsin as a pension plan. We use the assumptions that are reviewed for the state of Wisconsin's pension plan, assumptions that are reviewed for the state of Wisconsin's pension plan to project out. So a current employee, let's say they have 5 years of service, we assume part of them every year will terminate from the city. There's a portion that could become disabled or pass away, all the way through to retirement. And we have different where we expect people to retire. So we project out their lifespan. On top of that, we project out, will these participants, once they get to retirement, will they participate in the retired medical plan with the city? So there are a number of different assumptions that are built in to project out this liability into the future, project out to today's present value in dollars. So that's what we do on the liability side. There's also one other component where we prorate the liability for actives based on their current service versus expected service at retirement. And so somebody who's halfway through their career, if we assume that $50,000 in their liability, and then we would have 1/25th, or that amount of service in what's called service cost every year. And so I'll kind of touch a little bit on where the service cost component fits into all these calculations. But for retirees, they've accrued all of their liability, so 100% of what they currently have is in the liability. They would have zero service cost. Then, with the assets in the trust, we compare the liabilities with the assets to come up with a net OPEB liability. Does anybody have any questions so far? All right. So on page 12, we'll look at a reconciliation here on the top. So changes in net OPEB liability. I'll start at the top left column and kind of work my way down the left column, then center, and then to the right. So
Just one update. You did have it in your packet, but that was the draft report. You also will be using the final report, just so everyone's clear.
Yep. So the liability at the beginning of the year was $8.6 million. Again, that's that present value of future benefits prorated for actives and total for inactives. We would expect that liability to grow by a few components. The first being the service cost component. So again, that's the present value of benefits accrued by active participants for one additional year of service towards retirement. And so we would expect in 2021, that the liability would increase by about $238,000 just due to those actives accruing additional service. The next component on the list is the interest of total liability, and that's $563,000. You have to remember, this is a present value calculation, so all of those future expected payouts are 1 year closer. With a present value calculation, if they're closer, we would expect that liability to go up because there's no discounting of those, or less year of discounting on those present value calculations. Then we go down the list. So every 2 years, GASB requires a full valuation to be done. So that's when we take and do another snapshot valuation of liabilities done. So that's what we did this year. And so the difference in the data from 2 years ago to data this year resulted in a lower liability of about $195,000. So, not a very big component, but we would expect some gains, some losses, so some increases, some decreases every 2 years when we get new data. That could be more actives, less actives. Some participants didn't elect coverage or continued to work when we would have expected them to retire a little sooner. The next component, which is actually a fairly large amount here, is about $1.2 million decrease in the liability, and that's the effect of assumption changes. And so, as I mentioned, we use a number of assumptions that go into these present value calculations. And two of the main components that are tied to this are medical costs for all these retirees. So every actuarial firm calculates, expected medical costs today and also projects them into the future. And so one of the biggest differences between our valuation and our assumptions and the prior assumptions are that our expected medical inflation is significantly, I don't want to say significantly, but lower on an average per year than the prior actuary. So the prior actuary, if I remember correctly, started out at, let's say, 7% of medical inflation. So if medical costs were $1,000 this year, next year we'd expect them to be $1,070. And decreased, I think, by about a quarter point. All future inflation was about 5% or 5.5%, something like that. We project out using a medical inflation model that takes into account that medical inflation can only be so large of a percentage of the actual GDP. So we expect that medical inflation has to shrink at some point. So we expect that medical inflation has to shrink at some point so that it doesn't take up 40, 50% of GDP. That just doesn't seem logical. So our expected medical inflation started, I think, at like 6%, and that's in the back of our report. and decreased down to about 3.7%. So you can see every year it's maybe about 1%, 1.5% lower of expected increases than the prior actuary, which can grow, when we're looking at projected future costs 10, 15, 20 years down the line, can cause a 5, 10%, decrease in the expected liabilities. So that's where the majority of that from assumptions is contained.
What's the historical inflation rate?
Yeah, so I don't know the exact answer to that, but prior to maybe 2000s, I think it was lower. It was at 3-4%, and then medical inflation just ballooned up, where we were looking at 4%, and then medical inflation just ballooned up, where we were looking at 8 to 10% every year, and that's where it really became a significant component of the actual GDP versus just a minor component. So it balloon up quite a bit, and I think we have in recent years started to see. So it did balloon up quite a bit, and I think we have in recent years started to see that kind of come down back to normalized levels. The final component of the reconciliation of the liability are the benefit payments. So since we paid out, we paid out, $470,000 of benefits during the year, that's removed from the liability. That's no longer an obligation in the liability. So reconciling that, we have, we started at $8.6 million, and now as of 12/31/2021, we're at $7.6 million. The benefits paid were removed out of that trust, same amount as the liabilities. There were about $500,000 of contributions that are included in the trust or added to the trust, and then the trust actually earned about 16% in 2021, which is a great return, and one of the why the assets went from 7.8 up to about 9.1 million, and going now to the far right column, the plan was slightly underfunded, about 876,000 underfunded at the beginning of the year, now to almost 1.5 million. Overfunded isn't the right word, but funded more than the current million. Overfunded isn't the right word, but funded more than the current liabilities show. So there will be fluctuations with, I think your current asset allocation is about 70% equities, 30% bonds. So you're going to see some years where you have great returns like this and some volatility where you may not see this impact the funded status of the plan. Our long-term assumption for the expected return on assets is about 6.5%, which is what we discounted the liabilities at.
Does that return get averaged?
So it doesn't. That's where we're using a long-term. So we're looking at over a 30-year period. What would our expected return be based on this portfolio, this asset allocation? And so we're assuming 6.5%, compounded year over year. Again, you're going to have some years with 16% and another year that might be lower. So on average, we would expect, based on our capital market assumptions, about 6.5%. It might be lower. So on average, we would expect, based on our capital market assumptions, about 6.5%. Does anybody have any questions on kind of the liabilities and the funded status of the plan? I'll jump one more page to page 5. And what we really want to look here is, okay, so we're overfunded now, right? But what does that look like in the future? How are we looking into the future? And so that's what this actuarially determined is looking at is there's two components of the ADC to come up with what's the correct or an appropriate amount to contribute into the plan to make sure that it stays funded over a determined set time. So we're looking at over a 16-year period, we want the plan. That's the second component here, the amortization payment. You can see in the second column to the right there is actually negative. So since you're overfunded, we expect the assets to do more work than the liabilities. They're going to continue to grow, more than the liabilities would grow. And so that's helping keep your more than the liabilities would grow. And so that's helping keep your contributions lower. However, we still have that service cost component. Again, that liability is expected to grow with additional service, participants getting closer to retirement. And so we expect the liability to grow by about $248,000. Taking the service costs plus the amortization payment, we have a contribution of about $130,000. Bringing that to the end of the year, we're looking at about $150,000 actuarially determined contribution. And then we're projecting that out down at the bottom here over the next 10 years. You can see the fiscal year ending 2022. On the right there, we have that $149,000. The plan is collecting benefit payments or contributions year over year. And so those contributions are more than covering what the actuarially determined contributions are more than covering what the actuarially determined contribution is. And so, again, the plan is in great shape not only to be at 100% now, but to continue to do that into the future. That's kind of what I had back in the back of the report. There are all of those assumptions that I discussed. If you could look through those and see if that's anything that catches your eye, I'd be more than happy to, you can reach out to Peggy. Peggy can reach out to me, and I can answer any questions pertaining to that. If you're have trouble falling asleep at night. But that's kind of what I had in mind, and I just, any questions you guys have pertaining to the actuarial report or anything else, I'm happy to answer.
Looks good.
Any other comments, questions, concerns? If not, thank you very much for the information. Continues to be very fortunate, I guess, if I can use that term, to be in the position that we are. We know there are other government agencies that are struggling with this issue and will continue to do so, I think, as they move forward.
Could I ask, I guess, something since we're kind of in that thing? Do you, see other places that are not, are most places just WRS?
Well, so for OPEB plans, pretty much every municipality has their own retiree medical or OPEB plan. So, every different, whether it's school districts, cities, counties, kind of have their own plan as far as retiree medical benefits are concerned. For pension benefits, pretty much all of municipalities plan. And I know you guys have a, kind of a grandfathered pension plan, right? And then I think all new participants are going into the WRS. Yeah. And so very few entities within Wisconsin municipalities have a pension plan kind of on their own. Wisconsin municipalities have a pension plan kind of on their own.
Thank you.
Yep.
So, and then even as far as it goes, maybe just take that a step further as far as retiree insurance plans, Franklin compared to other communities. We do have retiree insurance. Some communities are getting rid of it altogether. It's definitely a recruitment and retention issue. Ours together, it's definitely a recruitment and retention issue. Ours is a little bit unique in that it's just that for the non-protected, it's just that sliver of time, 62 to 65. So it's offering a benefit. It's helping people get from where they need to be employed to, full Medicare, but it's not this, full Medicare, but it's not this, until life, for their full life and things like that. We do have protecteds that go a little longer, but again, all with good reason and something that's a recruitment and retention issue. So as much as we have this retiree insurance, we have it under control. We're managing it very well, and it's a tool we're using on the accounts that we've struck here. Not to mention, and I'm not going to use the word fortunate, I'm going to say well thought out, because had most communities done this, I think this one was started in the neighborhood of 2008-ish, and I think had most communities done it at that time, they could have been building a little bit, but now when everybody's they're behind the eight ball. I know one community that's paying over $1 million a year in their service payments. So again, I'm not going to use fortune. I'm going to just say it was very well planned. And
and many of those communities are changing their benefits to reduce their benefits, which is a struggle on its own, trying to handle.
Ed, did I see your comment?
Peggy, other than anecdotal evidence on the benefits of that for retention and hiring is there any data that shows the effectiveness of it, or how many people are,
It's an interesting question. It's an interesting question. I don't have data for Franklin on how many are using retiree benefits, but what I will tell you is we have a lot of employees here that are currently working, and they've already exhausted their opportunity to use that 62 to 65 sliver of time. What else? But what you have to remember is most employees at the City of Franklin were not in WRS, Wisconsin Retirement System, until 2019. The protecteds were, police and fire always were, because that's a state law, but everyone else was in one of two principal plans. We had a defined benefit plan for our public works employees, which is very similar to not that it's not a great plan, it is a great plan. It's just not a plan that somebody plans out for you and invests for you and, things like that. So we have more employees, I think, that are working longer. Like I said, we have, when you look at our employment demographics, we have a lot of people staying past that 62 to 65. A lot of people staying past that 62 to 65 range. So, yeah, not as far as I don't have specific data on that, but
I mean, is it something that we get going forward, given the labor market, that we might be able to promote or target individuals in communities that might fall in?
that are perhaps losing it, and we've had those questions come up. We're in the process of hiring somebody right now, and one of those questions was, did you get rid of your retiree insurance plan? No, we didn't. We still have it, and it's this. Keep in mind, though, you have for a non-protected employee, you have from age 62 to 65 to use it, and the requirement used to be 10 years, then it went to 50. Somebody's got to be here by age 42 in order to be able to use that benefit by age 62. So I think for more people, I think it's a tool, and I think it's being used. I think the chances today of somebody getting to using it are less than they were before, just because how mobile the workforce is getting. So, but I certainly wouldn't want to give up that tool.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Peggy, do you need a motion on this to recommend or,
Yeah, I was going to leave that to the committee. I know you haven't really seen. I was going to leave that to the committee. I know you haven't really seen this presentation in the past. Is this report something you'd like to, two choices, I think, accept and place on file or accept and forward to the council? So it's really the pleasure of the committee.
I would move to accept and forward to the council.
Second. Any other comments, or
All right,
we have a motion and a second?
I would just make an additional comment, if I may, because I do think it's important for the council to see this. And as I was going to say, with the council action sheet that goes along with it, I think some really good highlights and points. Council needs a little bit of positive stuff, to show that we are doing some good things as a city these days. So I do think it's very valuable, and council should be aware, and our employees should be aware.
I'll absolutely include everything that Jack said in summary.
Okay.
All right, we have a motion and a second, and I'll add comments that should be forwarded to the council. Those things can change. Investment returns can change. The market can change. Our workforce composition can change. We have a bubble that's kind of nearing the retirement age now, so there's probably going to be a higher need or demand on the payouts and services, but times and whatever workforce can grow. I mean, this is an ever changing and evolving kind of equation that we're balancing with a lot of different inputs. So that being said, hearing nothing further, all those in favor of referencing it and referring it to the council, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Thank you again very much.
Yeah,
We
thank
appreciate your time and joining us tonight.
Have a wonderful night.
You too.
Drive safe.
Thank you.
Moving on, I think our next item calls for a discussion on proposed 22 sanitary sewer user fees. And Peggy, I'm sure you want to talk to us about this.
I do. So this is actually, I didn't have it in your packet because I wanted to just make sure the numbers were all in order, but I did put a final draft at your place tonight that explains everything, and I'm certainly going to walk through everything. I think maybe what I want to do is just start out with, this is an annual review, we do an annual review. The reason for sewer rates changing very frequently is, there's two things really. The first one is Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage District, who provides Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage District, who provides basically our continual flow on sewer. That is a set of rates that come out every single January, and then the communities get to decide how to handle that. This is a really interesting one for me. I've been dealing with the metro area, I've been in over time, but the one unique thing in Franklin is all of our residential rates are fixed. So it's not based on your usage. I've not seen that before. Usually sewer rates go with water rates, right? So if you're a high water user, then you, for better or for worse, are a high sewer user. This one's a little bit different. Rates is a bit more of a puzzle, because what we're doing is we're wanting to charge a fixed fee and guess what the usage is going to be. So that's why you see some variability and some fluctuations. And there's also not a really clear separation between the metro rate and the local rate, because they all go into one budget. So with that said, there's a local rate, and that's to take care of our local sewer lines, our vehicles, our facilities, et cetera, to run the sewer portion of the city. And then there's the MMSD, which is the exact fees they charge us. Of the total fees they charge, 38% is local. That's very common. In 2022, MMSD, the formula that they give us to increase based on the experience from the prior year, they're saying that there's a 2.05% rate increase needed. And what they did is they look at flows every year, and they're 12-page manual, and basically it said that the volumetric rate is going down by 0.55%, but the fixed rate is going up by 15.24%. So net, that's a 2.05% increase. In addition to that, we have the local rate. The local rate is going up. Recommendation overall, the budget, again, both of these parts together, we had estimated 4%. Not a whole lot has changed from that 4%, because we know what projects are going to happen in 2022. There are some projects that are not happen in 2022. There are some projects that are not normal. They're maybe a little bit out of the ordinary. One of them happens to be the St. Martin's Force Main. There's going to be an inspection and cleaning. That's to the tune of about $80,000. So that's a pretty big out of the ordinary expense for the sewer utility. We have this new private property inflow and infiltration. Alderwoman Hanneman, I know you're on the committee. That's a new program that we're getting kicked off right now. The overall program we're planning for is about $225,000 in cost. We are expecting approximately $190,000 of that back from MMSD. So we're trying to use those grant funds that are made available through MMSD to take care of the responsibility. We also have labor and benefits changed for the year. We do have some cost allocations. We charge the sewer for different portions, i.e. the finance department's time in doing the rate and the fund management. There's utility billing that happens through the water utility. There was an increase, I'd say a notable increase in insurance costs for 2022, as well as a bunch of other small ups and downs. So that's what's generating that local increase. So on the MMSD side, we're looking at about $3.41 per year, 85 cents per quarter. And on the local side, we're looking at about $7.08. Make a note that last year we did increase the rates a little bit more, and that did include the sewer lift station project. That project is just getting off the ground now, but we did that borrowing in November of 21. It's underway. We're now starting to spend the money. We cashed out some, we had some reimbursements to pay on design and things that happened before by the end of the third quarter of 2022. I do have a little graph here as far as what the rates have been over time. If you wanted to see more specific information, I have a chart that shows what that looks like. I'm happy to share that with you. But overall, what I'd say is this is a pretty small utility, and with a pretty small utility, we see some equitable rate increases over time. And this one too is, I mentioned the St. Martin's Force Main. That's this year. Well, when that comes out of the budget, if something doesn't replace it, that's this year. Well, when that comes out of the budget, if something doesn't replace it, we obviously can review and reduce. Now, I didn't see a whole lot of times. I think there were over the last, from 2008 to 2022, I think there were 2 times that I saw decreases, but that's certainly that process we go through each year.
All right. Those of you who have been here know I've seen this before. Alderman Ed, do you have a comment or question?
A couple of questions, because this part of it's relatively new for me. So that is done at a break even, or is there a markup and overhead on it, or?
So the rates aren't regulated per se for water utility rates. You know, we go by the Public Service Commission, and they basically set the rates for us. We go in with a rate case and we tell them what it needs to be. In the case with sewer, it's an unregulated utility is what it's called. And so what we do is we look at our budget and our budget versus what, like I said, the majority in Franklin is residential. So it's very easy to say we have this many connections and it's $103.63 per connection, which would get us to where we want to be. We have a fund balance policy. We try to get us to where we want to be. We have a fund balance policy. We try to adhere to that. Sewer utilities and water utilities are usually not real flush with cash. It is a good idea to keep some cash in your utility. We don't have, I don't think, an exorbitant amount by any stretch. I think when I ran the cash values for the last 5 years, I saw somewhere between $1 million and $1.5 million. And on I think this year's overall budget, keep in mind that's depreciation included, was about $7 million. So $1.5 million is what we have in reserve. And big things can go wrong with sewers. We're very lucky for that, but there are some things that can go wrong with sewers. I know last year we had an issue, and we thought perhaps it was going to be an insurance issue. It was not. We ended up paying about $65,000 for one fix, so a small little fix. So having that cash on hand is appropriate. But no, it's not regulated. It's Finance Committee and then Council.
And one last question. On the commercial customers, does everybody pay the same rate, or are there high usage customers that have a negotiated rate?
There's not a variable rate. There are different rates for the certified sewer users. We have very few of them. Different rates for the certified sewer users. We have very few of them in the city of Franklin, but those are all determined by MMSD based on all of the makeup, the composition of their flow. But there's no, like sometimes in water you might see a declining or inclining rate block. You don't see any of that. It's simply a flat fee plus that volumetric rate.
To come to us and they were a high volume water user and sewer user, we don't negotiate the rates on that.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yes, John, go ahead.
Could I just get an example of who is a certified? There's some are certified. I don't either.
I don't
mean,
have any in
I have nowhere else to go tonight.
Franklin that
That's
I
why I'm
can't
asking
think
these
of.
stupid questions.
I can't think of one in Franklin, but I can give you a couple in some other communities. Food processors are almost always. Chris Hansen Labs, those are, so those bigger industrial-like. So
like right now, Strauss is their biggest water user.
They would certainly be a certified user.
Okay. Strauss is their biggest water user.
They would certainly be a certified user.
Okay. Thank you.
Beer makers, I think, would be on that list too. Milwaukee had a lot of them.
So if I could expand on that question, could we then likewise make the statement that if a large user would want to come into the city, that the citizens would not be paying for their additional usage of the sewers?
That would be correct. I do fees and we have impact fees. So
Yes.
sometimes
Yes.
those get left out because they're outside of this discussion, but they're also part of that. And the way the rates are structured, from the impact fee down to the connection fee down to the user rates, they are all based on what you use, pay as you use kind of situation. So nobody's subsidizing anyone.
Okay.
Discussion, I think, good questions. Otherwise, I think what Peggy's looking for is a recommendation to council that these be accepted. And I'm assuming this will be included on the March bill calculations, correct?
So yeah, the next bills, I learned a lot about all these rates in a short time, but We only bill 4 times a year, so we bill April will be the next time we bill, and that will be for January through March. So that's why the timing works so well here, but if it was approved by the committee tonight, it would go to council at the next meeting, 1st of March, and then the water utility staff would be able to implement those rates for April,
Absolutely, that's been the pattern. Okay, anything else?
I will move to adopt the quarterly 2022 residential sanitary sewer charge of $68.38 and a fixed commercial connection charge of $16.99 per dollar, and can I say rounded up to 91 per 1,000 gallon volumetric charge effective January 1st, 2022 as provided by Municipal Code 207-14H. Parents 3, Parent B. 3, Parent B.
Second.
Does it need to be added to forward to council, or is that just assumed in the motion?
Yeah, all the recommendations here at the Finance Committee are non, I don't know if binding's the right word, but I mean, they're not, the council has the ultimate action. I don't know if binding's the right word, but I mean, they're not, the council has the ultimate action. So our recommendations go to them with the attached recommendations. So nothing still gets acted until council approves. Any further discussions on the motion? I have a motion, but do we have a second? Any further discussions on the motion? I have a motion, but do we have a second? Okay, excuse me, John. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on the sanitary sewer user fees for 2022 as proposed? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Do we have next on the agenda? Sanitary sewer. Bank reconciliation update. Okay.
I did leave that one on. I know we've been talking about it monthly since the last audit. I'm hoping to be able to prove that we have a process in place once the audit occurs. We can talk about that when we talk about our next best finalized bank statement we have. Our reconciliation we have is from September, but the amount of items from October through November are very few. We're working through those right now. We're getting rid of all the stale checks and going through those processes. And so we really just need to finish up December. So I've already had a conversation about the auditors need to finish up December. So I've already had a conversation about the auditors about the way that looked in the past. And they also are going to make sure they make some visits when they come for their field work and make sure that we're on a path for the future. And one of our internal goals is to make sure we have January and February at least done by the time the auditors come, because so we want to make sure we have those two ones in the new year strong, so that we are on our path. And I've also talked to staff about keeping up with that a little bit more on a regular basis. So if that means we need to sit down and meet as a group, that's what we're going to do.
All right, any other comments on that? I'm sure staffing now becomes a balancing game here as well, but hopefully some of the technology will impact that also and be some savings. I know we've got some new processes going through with credit card and utility billings and different stuff. I think there was adding some newness to that process, but hopefully that will wind itself down.
Yep.
All right, moving on. Council actions previously.
Council accepted the November financials as well as the change in the fee disclosure. We have notified principal and November financials as well as the change in the fee disclosure. We have notified principal, and they're going to be changing those statements. They're going to first do a notification to all the employees and give employees a chance to have some question and answer periods before that happens, but that will move forward in 2022 as well.
Sounds good. Moving on. It sounds like meeting options for March and or April.
So the regular scheduled meeting in March is supposed to be the 22nd. Unfortunately, I'm not here that week, and I can't change my plans. Had I known what was going to happened, first to the 26th, I will not be available. So we do have some options. We could cancel the March meeting. It's typically canceled because of the audit work, but I just want to be careful on that because we are looking at moving the audit 1 month later. The auditors were supposed to be in person starting in March. The auditors were supposed to be in person starting on March 21st. Again, well, two things. Me being here is probably the smaller of the problem. The bigger problem is we still have a lot of work to do. When we went back and did some recon on what had been done, we figured out we had a lot of work to do. So we made a plan with the auditors. They're looking at coming in the middle of April rather than the end of March, which will give us a little bit more time to make sure we have everything in order. We kind of took the state report deadline, which is May 15th, and worked our way backwards from that because I think it's very important for us to have the draft financial statements and footnotes in order to do our state report. Otherwise, you're guessing at a lot of numbers. So, with that said, whether we have the March meeting or the April meeting is really, been working on the OPEB investment manager. I have a couple more meetings next week. I'm hoping to have that in place by mid-March, a recommendation, I should say. We have some preliminary year-end information, and we're just getting comfortable with it right now, making sure we have, general fund is really the easiest fund to do just because it's mostly on a cash basis. We have a couple allocations to do, and that's about it on that side. So I think for the next meeting, we would have preliminary year-end information. I just about got the budget done, but we're going to distribute that in March as well. I know we talked about a TIF update. We're working through the year end on TIF, but I can certainly, whether we're all the way done with that at the March meeting or not, I can certainly run through each of the TIFs and give all of you an update on what's been happening and what's going on and where we're at with some of those funding issues and things like that. So that's what's on my list for the next meeting. So right now, my gut feeling is we should schedule a March.
So that's a scheduling conflict. John, are you had a comment or wanted to? Go ahead.
Okay, my personal comment is, number one, Peggy, thank you for everything that you're doing and everything you've additionally taken on. And if you are gone, hopefully it's for something that you want to do. So given the fact that, I mean, you've taken on this mountainous task of Director of Admin, now you've got the other hat you're wearing, I would like to see us cancel the March meeting, get it off your head, we come back in April, and hopefully by that time, maybe some staffing changes will be changed by then, and hopefully by that time, maybe some staffing changes will be changed by then. Something else will be going on. I think the things you mentioned, to me, are burning down they're not burning issues, okay? If they can wait a month, they can wait a month. So my personal things, we go with option one, we cancel, okay? If they can wait a month, they can wait a month. So my personal things, we go with option one, we cancel the March meeting. I yield.
I'm fine with that.
Okay, anybody else comments? Ed? I think typically that has been kind of the case, but it ebbs and flows. I mean, typically we got pretty routine. I mean, it's not like we have a choice. There's quite a bit of work going on behind the scenes, obviously, with the audit and updating. And a lot of that information is obviously what we're kind of interested post-completion of that anyway. TIDS, of course, will be one of those. I mean, 5 and 6 have to be on our radar. Unfold, I think, and move forward. Yes, Shari.
I might just add a comment, and I don't know that it has any bearing on anything or not, but so our next meeting would be after the election. And at that point, the mayor may choose to make some changes on this particular committee. So the case.
That's
I've enjoyed
always
meeting with you.
Yeah, that's always the ebb and flow of what's happening. The other thing that could impact that is I think we all are aware that the mayor is looking for new citizen candidates as well. And we've talked about that if some individuals that would bring added value to the group, definitely, I think, to you, Peggy, or to him directly, so that those can be vetted or looked at or whatever.
I did talk to somebody, and the concern is that now the homes in other states and that they're gone for sometimes 2 months or so at a time. So he was kind of concerned that it might not work.
Yep. Well, those are always the realities. I think that's why we have a scheduled committee of 7 or 8 or whatever, so that the occasional scheduled committee of 7 or 8 or whatever, so that, the occasional absence or whatever doesn't cause a, stoppage of the wheels. Right now, we're kind of operating on a bare bones minimum, so attendance, when you see Lisa's emails, you're going to be here, that's why, because, without Lisa's emails, you're going to be here, that's why, because, without 4, we're not meeting the quorum standards. So that sounds reasonable to me. Is there anything else, Peggy, that you see as issues, or I know there's a lot going on, as I think John already mentioned, but where you might need our assistance or we can provide some assistance?
I don't think so at this point. We're at a time of the year where we just have a lot of work to do. It's not a public process like the budget process. It's not, there's not debt offerings going out and things like that. Those would be really critical meetings to miss, but knowing that we're working on year end and staff is doing an amazing job plowing through it. Every single person in finance and staff is doing an amazing job plowing through it. Every single person in finance has offered, we have a couple part-time employees. They've offered to come in extra. We have one temporary employee that we had last year, did a lot of great work for us, helped me with the CIP. She started last Wednesday back up with us so she could help to do some of her. Everybody's just really joining in and working hard on everything. And so I don't think we're in a horrible place. The question just becomes, at what point now do we bring somebody new in, right? We want to kind of get through these next 4 weeks, but we do have some plans, to Alderman Nelson's question, on how to move forward with this. And I'm certainly, it's not on the agenda. That would be wonderful. But we're doing the most important things, like the sewer rates. That was just something that couldn't wait. So, we hunker down and get it done. So I think we're doing okay.
Okay.
But if there's any questions you have, like the TID updates or anything like that, I'm always happy to prepare a written report as well. So just let me know if there's something that becomes more pressing on that as well. So just let me know if there's something that becomes more pressing on that.
Yep.
Given that your staff kind of toils away from the mainstream, is there anything that can be done to show appreciation for all the extra work that they're putting in?
I've been trying to do little things ever since basically November. When I said to Tom, the accounting supervisor, I feel like he's my phone a friend, because whenever I don't know some detail about the city, he's the person who helps me fill it in. So I've been trying to do that on a smaller basis, but I'm hoping as we get through all of this, we can do something a little bit formally from the city, and the mayor does have that ability to do some of those small things.
Point of information, what happened to Brian?
Brian decided this wasn't the kind of work he wanted to do. So he basically said position requires.
But if someone showed up with brownies or cookies to staff, it would not be turned away, correct?
That's correct.
Do we have any other candidates that look promising?
At this time, we do not. We did not. We were February 11th, I think, when I sent out the notice. We were as caught off guard. We had a lot of work to do and things like that, but I was not thinking that was coming that soon. Honestly, what happened is we needed to put together a 60-day plan. We needed to put together a 60-day plan. How were we going to get from February 8th to April 8th? And I think there were some realizations that came about at that point. But we do have a couple good leads, not necessarily on individual people, but on recruiters to help us.
Adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing, seeing none. All those in favor?
Aye.